And now to a story of spying and deception emerging from the U.S. Air Force Academy. According to information obtained by the Colorado Springs Gazette, the Air Force's Office of Special Investigations, or the OSI, was running a secret program in which cadets were forced to spy on their classmates to catch suspected drug users and sex offenders. The cadets, who acted as informants, were encouraged to deceive classmates, professors, and commanders while taking photos, wearing recording devices, and filing secret reports. And according to the Gazette, this is something many cadets were bullied into doing. It says the records show OSI uses FBI-style tactics to create informants. Agents interrogate cadets for hours without offering access to a lawyer, threaten them with prosecution, then coerce them into helping OSI in exchange for promises of leniency they don't always keep. One of those cadets was Eric Thomas, who claims he was recruited into the program in 2010, where he essentially became a spy for the OSI and secured several convictions, drug and sexual assault convictions, against his fellow cadets. Eventually, Thomas himself was kicked out of the program when OSI determined he, quote, no longer had access to targets. And documents obtained via Freedom of Information Act request confirm Thomas's story. And given Thomas's history of dealing with infractions as a spy for the OSI, he himself had racked up enough demerits to be kicked out of the Air Force too. And he was, in 2012, just 6 months before graduating. He thought the OSI would defend him at this hearing, but instead he was left hanging. The Air Force had denied such a program existed, but earlier I spoke with the investigative reporter at the Colorado Springs Gazette who broke this story, Dave Phillips, and I first asked him if the Air Force is still sticking to its denial now that this story has been broken open.
No, they just came out yesterday and said, yes, we use this program, although they wouldn't say how much or give any details, but they said, you know, it works, we're allowed to use it, and they defended it. So one of the things that really struck me about it, that using informants at the Air Force Academy, is the Academy takes its honor code very seriously. They require cadets never to lie. In fact, if you get caught lying, you can get kicked out for one offense. But at the same time, this program pretty much requires some cadets to lie. And I tried to get them to speak about that seeming contradiction, and so far no one's really discussed it with me.
Well, we're learning of this through the case of Eric Thomas, who claims, and he has evidence that you've presented that shows that he was working within this program. He was spying on his fellow cadets, securing numerous convictions in the process before he himself was kicked out of the Air Force, and he was recruited after he got in trouble. As far as you know, does this program within OSI target people who are already in trouble? Have they ever picked up any clean cadets and asked them to join the program?
Well, what we know about what cadets they've had contact with is very, very limited. But generally speaking, how these programs work, and these programs are used in other places, not just at the Air Force, although using them in colleges is extremely rare. What we know is that, yeah, you might get picked up for some sort of small misconduct, and then law enforcement would try and leverage that and say, look, we'll make this go away if you work for us. Now, generally within the FBI or within law enforcement, they pinch small-time people to try and get bigger people. So you get the drug user so you can try and learn who the drug dealer is or something like that. In the case of the Academy, that didn't necessarily seem to happen. It seemed as if when they created informants, they were looking for any kind of misconduct, no matter how small.
What happens to other OSI informants? Eric Thomas was kicked out here. You've spoken with other former informants. They provided some statements to you in this piece. It's almost as though once you get recruited into this program, you're on your way out of the Air Force. You're going to be kicked out eventually when you no longer used to rat out your fellow cadets. Is that kind of the way this works?
You know, honestly, we don't know how it works. What we do know is we have a few, a very limited number of examples. Within those examples, 3 of the 5 I know of were kicked out for their actions. One went on and sort of dropped out of the program, became an officer, wants nothing to do with it. Another went and worked for, now works for OSI. So I think there's a range of things that can happen, but there's a lot of risks involved when you're an informant, by nature, you're running with a bad crowd. A lot of unintended things can happen. And so I wouldn't be surprised if it's a typical outcome that these guys get into more trouble and are eventually expelled.
You brought up in your story kind of a backstory in the Air Force in which they were dealing with all these allegations of drug use in the early 2000s, which might have been the nexus of this, or the origin of this sort of informant program out of the OSI. As far as you can tell, is this exclusive to the Air Force? Can we assume that other branches of the military have similar programs in place as well?
Well, that's really a tricky question. So yesterday I got statements from both the Army and the Navy saying that they do not have programs of this type. The question is, are they telling the truth? I imagine if I had asked that question to the Air Force, a month ago, their response would have been the same. So officially, no, there's no other programs like this. Unofficially, I'm not sure.
What happens to Eric Thomas now? Your article has kind of dragged this program into the light. As you said, the Air Force is now fessing up that this program actually existed. Have any of these new documents that you received through FOIA requests and everything, can they allow Thomas to have any recourse to what happened to him?
Well, what Eric Thomas wants is just to get his diploma from the academy and get his officer's commission and have a career in the Air Force. He said that's all he's really ever wanted to do. Will that happen now that all this has come out is totally unclear. Right now, the Air Force's response to our reporting has been to say that Cadet Thomas was a cadet with a long history of misconduct, that all of his misconduct happened before he was an informant, and that therefore they were totally justified in what they did. Now, my reporting I believe contradicts what they're saying, but right now they're not conceding to any of those points.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what more comes out of this reporting here. Dave Phillips, investigative reporter at the Gazette. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.